We all know that raised garden beds are great entry points into backyard gardening, especially if you have challenging soil in your yard. And because you can fill raised beds with things like organic fertilizers and compost and raised bed soil, you can ignore issues like heavy clay or sandy soil or highly compacted soil and just start gardening the way you want to. There's just one problem, and that's that raised beds are stupid expensive. No, seriously, they're shockingly expensive, like up to hundreds of dollars per bed for fairly small raised bed sizes. And if you want to build it yourself, you're still paying through the nose for lumber because it's important you use rot-resistant wood like cedar or redwood, and the lumber itself can be really costly. But one day in the lumber aisle, I noticed that untreated cedar fence pickets were significantly more affordable than their standard lumber counterparts. The boards themselves were thinner, typically 3/4 of an inch to an inch, rather than 2-inch thick standard lumber, but it's still cedar, still rot resistant, and it looks absolutely gorgeous when you transform it into a raised bed. So today I'm gonna be walking you through how to build an affordable raised garden bed using cedar fence pickets. We built 4x12 beds, but with a couple more cuts, this could also work for 4x6 or 4x4, depending on the size of your garden and how much you wanna grow this year. Before you start, here's what you need to know about the build. This raised bed is 16.5 inches high, and we used 5.5 inch wide cedar fence pickets as the primary material. If you can't find 5.5 inch wide near you, you can substitute for a 3.5 inch wide to create 10.5 inch high beds. Or if you want an even taller bed, you can add an extra 3.5 inch wide plank in that scenario to create a 17.5 inch tall bed. Be advised, if you do that, you will need extra screws. Now this is important. Please be sure that the pickets you choose are not pressure treated because we want to avoid unwanted chemicals leaching into your future soil. So definitely check the signage at your big box store or lumber yard, wherever you buy it, to make sure that this wood is untreated. Now untreated cedar pickets, they're fairly orange in color when first purchased, but they will weather to an attractive tannish brown in a year or two. So this is totally normal. Also, here's a big tip. If the pickets are damp or wet at the time you purchase, allow them to dry for several days before you begin, because pickets shrink as they dry. So if you build it while it's wet, the pickets will pull apart and create gaps in your raised bed. As far as what you need to build this raised bed, it's pretty straightforward. It requires you to make a couple of simple straight cuts, which would be faster with a powered saw, but a hand saw would work just fine. You may even be able to request to have the links cut at your hardware store for you. Now, this build does require the use of a power drill. If budget is a concern, Harbor Freight sells a relatively cheap one. If you want to know exactly what materials you need to build this from start to finish, I've linked all of the materials as well as the building plans in the description of this video. When you're shopping for the cedar pickets, be sure to look down the length of them to make sure they're relatively straight. Sometimes these boards are warped and you don't want that. I don't know, that's all I got. You don't want them to be warped. A cedar 2x4 is gonna serve as the support pieces for the inside of the bed. You're gonna wanna cut those to 6 16.5 inch long pieces, which we're gonna place around the perimeter of the inside of the bed. Then you're gonna need a center support piece to prevent this very long bed from bowing out or bowing in the middle. In our case, we removed the dog-eared end of one cedar fence picket and cut it down to about 48 3/4 inches. We're going to need to make some cuts to prep the short side walls that are on either side of the long bed. If you're using 5.5 inch wide fence pickets like us, you're going to want to cut 6 of them down to 50 inches long, making sure you remove the dog-eared end in the process. Now for the long side walls, you're going to want to set aside the remaining 5.5 inch wide planks with no cuts. For the trim pieces that go along the top of the bed, we're using 2 3.5 inch wide cedar pickets for each side. We're cutting those down to 53 inches long. You got this. It's just a hand saw. I promise you can do it. Don't be scared. It's fine. I promise. And even if it's a powered saw, it's also fine. You can do it. Okay, now we get to do the fun stuff. We get to actually build the thing. So the first step in the build is to build the long side walls of the raised bed. The one that we're building today is 12 feet long on either side, and we're gonna build 2 6-foot sections to make that up. So we're gonna lay some wall support pieces about 6 feet apart, lay the pickets down on top of the support pieces, and screw them in to secure. Now to build the other half of the long wall, you're gonna do the exact same thing, but you're gonna wanna make sure that on the flat side of the pickets, half of the support piece sticks out because we're gonna use that to screw the 2 long pieces together. Once you've built both halves of the long side, you align both halves with the straight edges touching each other, with piece B resting on the wall support piece attached to piece A. So congratulations, you've built one wall of the bed so far, and you're gonna repeat all of those same steps again to build the other long side. To complete the box and connect to the long walls with short sides, you're gonna stand up one of those long walls and then attach one of those short planks that you cut down to the 4-foot length at a 90-degree angle so that the 2 corners are flush. 3 screws will connect the plank with the 2x4. And you'll repeat that with 2 more wall planks, which will then build up the entire short side of the wall. Once you've done that, you now have an L shape. we want to make a U shape by connecting the other long wall. So you're going to stand that other wall up, connecting it to the short side with 3 screws per plank. This is a part where it definitely helps to have a second pair of hands. And now that you have that U shape, it's just a matter of building that 4th wall. You'll do that the exact same way you built the short wall on the other side. Now for a 4x12 bed, it's very long and it's going to need a support piece in the middle to prevent the bed from bowing out or caving in. That center support piece is going to go across the bed in the middle of the box. Put it to one side of the center wall supports, halfway up from the ground, and screw it in. Now we're on to doing the trim. We actually used a hand planer to smooth out the finish of the trim pieces because we thought it looked nice, but you don't have to do that. It is totally optional. You're going to start with the short trim pieces on one of the short ends. Place one short trim piece on one of the short ends of the box, centering it on the short side wall plank. You'll add 1 screw to each of the wall support pieces to secure that trim piece in place. And for good measure, we'll add 1 screw in the center to connect the trim directly to the short side wall plank. Again, for the other side of the box, you're just going to do the exact same thing. Just rinse and repeat. Now we'll do the trim for the long sides. You're going to place a long trim piece on the long end of the box, butting the end against the short trim piece that we previously attached so that it's flush with the inside wall supports. Now remember, we haven't cut the long trim pieces yet, and we want to make sure it's a perfect fit. So the long trim piece is going to butt up against the short trim piece to form an L shape. You're going to measure from there to the middle of the center wall support. In a perfect world where we've done everything right, that equals 70 3/4 inches. But whatever that number is, that's the length you're going to want to cut that long trim piece to. You're going to screw those trim pieces in, repeat the step on the other side, and you have yourself a gorgeous garden box. Now this makes a 4x12 garden bed. I think it's an amazing size for a garden bed because it's almost 50 square feet of growing space. But if you want a smaller bed, you can easily make this a 4x6 by simply not building the second half of the long walls and squaring the bed off at 6 feet. Like I said, I have step-by-step instructions on how to build this bed from start to finish, and all of the materials linked in the description of this video. Now the price of wood is going to vary greatly depending on your hardware store or lumber yard or whatever the powers that be decide to charge for lumber on any given day. But for us, we spent $126 per raised bed. And when we built 2 of them, that means I got almost 100 square feet of garden space for under $300. And I don't know about you, but that is a great deal. A really good deal. Do you know how much raised beds cost? They're so expensive. Why spend hundreds of dollars on pre-made raised beds that you're gonna have to still assemble in this exact same way when you can just make a couple of quick cuts and then put together this bed for literally less than $150? And there is no pre-made bed on the market that's sold at 4x12. That's 50 square feet of garden space, or it's like 48 or something. I don't know. Math is not my thing, personally. Now, once you place these cedar beds down and fill them all the way with soil, they're gonna be basically permanent. So you wanna make sure that you put them in the right place. The majority of vegetables need at least 6 hours of sun, so definitely check the light conditions in your yard to make sure that they get enough light. Convenient access to a hose or other irrigation will also be really important, especially if you live in the Western United States, like I do. Now, if you're wondering what you should fill these beds with, I'm gonna be posting another video very soon about the ideal soil makeup of a raised garden bed. I'm also gonna be talking about how to make gardens more aesthetically pleasing. So if you want more content from a sustainable landscape and garden designer who does this for a living, you should hit all of the buttons. You should like, you should subscribe, and you should hang out with us this summer as we spend all of our free time out in the garden. That's it for now. Goodbye.